In a spoiler that will surprise exactly nobody paying attention, self-professed nonpartisan journalist Piers Morgan is very happy that Donald Trump won the 2024 election. And so he invited on his show, friend of our show, liberal streamer Destiny, to try to needle and provoke and troll him. And not only did he fail, he was actually stunned into silence when Destiny fact-checked him multiple times, and we have to talk about it. But before we do, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, at the end of the most recent episode of Piers Morgan Uncensored, Destiny, liberal streamer and political commentator, was invited back on. And again, the whole thing was obviously an attempt by Piers Morgan to try to dunk on Destiny. Ha, your candidate lost. But as somebody who knows Destiny, it's like trying to draw blood from a stone. You're not going to provoke him that way, especially knows if that's exactly what you're trying to do. So we're going to play this whole segment and unpack it together along the way, because I would argue in some respects it backfired. And it was actually Piers Morgan who kind of looked like an idiot at the end.
I can't imagine this could have gone any worse for you, could it?
There are ways it could have gone worse. I think the writing was probably on the wall. Obviously, I have to do a stream for. Well, I could think of a number of ways it could have gone worse. We could have lost every single state. Could have been the Reagan landslide that everybody wanted it to be. But I think the writing was probably on the wall when the Florida vote started rolling in, and you saw that Miami had flipped red. But listen, we got to do a show, you know, as well as I do. You got to keep it entertaining for 12 hours. So we were engaging in some high-level Bernie math into the deep hours of the night, trying to see if there was a way for Harris to win. And it was a fun time.
I mean, look, it's been an absolute debacle for the Democrats. Why do you think it's been such a crushing defeat?
Honestly, I think that I understand that we have to keep our jobs and we have to make sure that our jobs are important by telling people how important they are. But I think the real answer, because all the analysis was done earlier by all these panelists, especially Roger Stone, who's an American trader, was absolutely ludicrous. I think the actual answer is Americans just kind of vote based on the economic vibes they feel. I think that when Biden won in 2020, it was because COVID. Everybody felt horrible. The economy was like everything was crazy. Not just the economy, everything was crazy. So people voted for Biden. I think that when Biden came in, I think we had a lot of inflation early on. People still feel the cumulative effects. So then they vote Trump. I think it's probably as simple as that.
So obviously the exit polls are still coming in. We're still trying to parse through the data. I should say the initial exit polls say that the economy was ranked number 2, right? And that actually democracy was ranked number 1. But of course, then you got to get granular. What do you mean by democracy? And is it all people believing that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, which again, spoiler alert, he is. He is absolutely a threat to democracy. Or were there a sufficient number of Republicans who had been brainwashed into believing that the Democratic Party is a threat to democracy, even though President Biden acknowledged that there would be a peaceful transfer of power? Vice President Harris formally and publicly and privately conceded at every level. Again, total asymmetry in how the parties behave. But I should also say there is a surge of anti-incumbency sentiment across the planet. I read an article earlier today that in 10 recent elections all across the planet, the incumbent party got shellacked regardless of their particular political ideology. Conservative parties, like in the United Kingdom, suffered enormous electoral backlash. Same in Japan. Here in the United States, you have a liberal or progressive administration, which got shellacked at the polls. So that's also a major factor at play. And of course, a lot of that has to do with COVID and inflation, which followed from COVID as well. So I think it's more than just what Destiny is saying, but Destiny's right on the money in terms of a very specific component, which is inflation and its downstream effects.
You can try to reach to all of these other things, but basically every other point brought up earlier was just factually completely and totally ridiculous and incorrect. The idea of weaponizing the DOJ and then bringing up New York State. The fact that Donald Trump has done every single thing that you guys earlier were accusing the Biden admin of doing, except 20 times worse. I don't think at the end of the day, Americans don't care about that. If you talk to an average person, they're not going to tell you about the Department of Justice is weaponizing, blah, blah. They're just going to say man, shit's expensive right now. Fuck. And that's about it, I think.
So I'll also point out that, again, the notion that the Biden-Harris administration has weaponized the Department of Justice is ludicrous, given that for every Republican, prominent Republican who has been investigated and prosecuted, you can name a high-profile Democrat as well in an election year, including Henry Cuellar, a Democrat, Bob Menendez, a Democrat. And of course, President Biden's only living son was investigated and prosecuted and successfully convicted, even though Biden had the power to snap his fingers and totally kill that investigation in its crib. So no, the notion that the DOJ is weaponized is patently absurd.
I mean, that is partly true, certainly on the economic part. I agree with you. And I think I would add immigration and the southern border crisis as being a major added component to that, because people resented the fact that not only could they not afford to feed their kids, but there were all these people coming in illegally on the border and putting extra pressure on public services and taking jobs and so on. I think you can't discount that.
That's not.
Well, you would discount it, but I wouldn't.
No, I would discount it because the Republicans discounted it. If the border was a huge issue, then the border bill wouldn't have been shut down. They would have negotiated harder on it. But they didn't. They shut it down because they knew it wasn't a real issue. People care about things like the border and immigration because Republicans told them to care about things like the border and immigration. The reality is unemployment is incredibly low. If you want a really big top line takeaway from this whole thing that would be interesting that nobody will discuss because it's incredibly boring, perhaps the Federal Reserve targets politically should actually target things like inflation more than unemployment. Maybe on a political level, maybe it was worth it to suffer 8 or 9% unemployment rather than so aggressively trying to target an inflation figure and keeping unemployment low. Maybe, but that's a.
So what's interesting about this is Jon Stewart, when he still had his show on Apple TV or Apple Plus last year, the year before, he had a conversation with economist Larry Summers about this. And Larry Summers took a very harsh view as well, that the Federal Reserve, instead of focusing on lowering inflation, or excuse me, the unemployment rate, rather than inflation, should have flipped it. Exactly what Destiny is saying. Perhaps politically, it would have advantaged the Democrats in the long run if Jerome Powell and the chairman of the Federal Reserve and the Fed had been basically willing to keep millions of Americans unemployed as a consequence or as a trade-off for keeping the price of things low and interest rates low. That was what Larry Summers advocated for. And Jon Stewart made a pretty compelling case that it's more humane and it'll pay off in the long run to actually get people back to work and make sure that they can feed their families. But to Stephen's point, to Destiny's point, it didn't seem to benefit Democrats politically for them to have approached the economic recovery the way they did. President Biden, passed another round of stimulus after the 2 COVID stimulus packages under Donald Trump. He put money in the pockets of the American people. And between the Treasury Department, the Biden administration, and the Federal Reserve, which is an independent agency, the soft landing that they orchestrated, they did try to bring down inflation, but what they were most successful at is reducing unemployment to record lows. And it doesn't seem to have worked out for them at all at the ballot box, which brings Destiny, to another point that I think is really important for all of us to acknowledge.
The macro econ question.
When you get a result like this, Destiny, notwithstanding your chilling self-confidence, which I obviously admire as a trait, do you have a moment of self-awareness where you just go in the mirror, wow, I was so wrong?
Do you think that the Republicans had a moment of self-awareness in 2020?
Well, it wasn't the question. I just wonder whether you had a moment of self-awareness.
So you see how Piers Morgan, he smiled. Again, Piers Morgan's not stupid. He's really not. Sometimes he comes off that way because, of course, defending Trump, is like defending flat earth, right? So it's easy to make you look like an idiot. But Piers Morgan's actually really smart. And he's smiling because he's also aware. He's like, damn, that's a good pushback. I never insisted that Republicans take a good look in the mirror. Nobody demanded that Republicans engage in introspection after they not only, again, let's go back to Donald Trump's record prior to 2024. He wins the 2016 election, but not the popular vote. He loses the 2018 midterms. He loses his 2020 reelection bid. He loses the 2021 Senate runoffs. Both seats held by Republicans, lost to Democrats. They lose the 2022 midterms. They lose the 2023 off-year elections. For the most part, the electoral record of the Democrats has been vastly superior under Trump's leadership of the Republican Party than the Republican Party's has. Now, again, 2024 has gone a long way to reversing those tides. But the point is, what Destiny's getting at is introspection is something that we should be insisting that the losers of every election engage in. But we never insisted that the Republicans do that. And as a matter of fact, they just doubled down on the very thing which cost them so many elections. And now it's paid off in this particular one.
I look at the figures as they come in. I try to analyze what the public is. But this idea that the Democratic Party needs to do some huge soul searching after the Republicans, tried to coup their way back into office when they lost the last election. Nah, I think that's ridiculous. I think the double standard is ridiculous. I think that the passes that you guys give Trump are absolutely insane. I think at the end of the day, it's just voting on your general economic trends. The only tragic thing is that because the economy has been righted in such a positive way, and nobody knows it because nobody talks about it, but the United States is outperforming basically every other country in the world on metrics like inflation, on metrics like unemployment, on metrics like real wages. Now that the ship has been righted, we're in a situation again where thankfully a Republican can come in after a Democrat has, I complained about this before in your show, after a Democrat has righted the ship after an economic catastrophe. Trump did it after Obama, and now Trump is going to do it again after Biden, and now he can try to take credit for all the things that he wasn't able to do in his administration, right? He couldn't pass infrastructure. Biden did. Now when stuff is getting built, he's going to take credit for it. He couldn't bring manufacturing like chips back to the United States when he tried to tariff China. Biden did with the CHIPS Act. Now Trump could take credit for it as that stuff gets built. So, the cycle of politics continues.
When you realize...
So what I like about that, this refers to the point that I said that Destiny was going to follow up on, which is, as we've discussed on this channel, as a consequence of this election, Donald Trump is going to be able to take credit for things that he had nothing to do with. And as a matter of fact, his party very often opposed. And as a matter of fact, Donald Trump from the sidelines at Mar-a-Lago also opposed. The infrastructure bill, Biden got it done in 1 year. Trump tried to get it done in 4 years. This is, by the way, objective proof of Biden's superiority as an executive and legislator, because they had an apples to apples, policy goal. Trump failed, Biden succeeded. But because of the delay in time, right, it takes years for these bridges and roads and structures and infrastructure projects to be built. And many of them will either be built or completed on Donald Trump's watch, even though he had nothing to do with it. He'll take credit for it. And by the way, there's a reason that Piers Morgan was smiling there, because he knows it's a fair point for which he has no refutation. But he also knows that Donald Trump is the very sort of person who would do that sort of thing in the first place, very cynically and very shamelessly. So again, great point by Destiny.
Realized that Trump had won the White House, the Senate, probably the House. He's going to get another 2 on the Supreme Court, probably. In other words, a complete clean sweep. He won the popular vote as well as the Electoral College. Did you cry?
No, I'm not. But I'm not a crier. If I was more emotional, maybe I would have.
Not a tear? Nothing?
I mean, I was streaming all night. If there were any tears there, you would have seen them.
So again, the attempt to troll him failed. Destiny is again, trying to do it in that respect. I mean, there's a way to provoke him, but when you are going out for a specific outcome like that and trying to provoke that sort of response, he's going to shut you down. Great performance by Destiny, pointing out that Donald Trump, engages in no introspection. He's going to shamelessly take credit for the things he had nothing to do with, and insisting that Democrats are somehow, obligated to do things that Republicans don't do is ridiculous. I will say that I think that the Democrats should engage in introspection, but I also felt the same way about Republicans. The problem is that now that MAGA has won this election, despite the 2018 defeats, the 2020 defeats, the 2021 defeats, the 2022 and 23 defeats, despite all of that, this is now going to incentivize MAGA Republicans to continue doing what they're doing because they finally won one and they won it big. But otherwise, masterful performance by Destiny, stunning Piers Morgan at times with fact checks that Piers Morgan was ill-equipped to defend, and so he changed the subject. You'll love to see it in real time. And in the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.